Hello, everyone. I hope you're settling in comfortably, ready to drift slowly into the quieter corners of history. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to imagine all of you scattered across the globe, tuning into the same story at the same moment, each in your own world, each experiencing the rhythm of the past in your own unique way. Today, we're going to step into a world that was harsh, confined, yet astonishingly human. Life in prisoner of war camps during the Second World War, a reality that was far more complex and intricate than one might imagine at first glance, and a story that many overlooked when thinking about the grand sweep of history. Imagine waking up in a barracks where the wooden planks of the floor creak beneath your weight, the air thick with the smell of damp straw and unwashed bodies, and the faint metallic scent of cold metal gates that surround your entire existence. The mornings were often indistinct from the nights, the sky sometimes hidden by clouds or fog rolling over barbed wire fences, and yet the sun would creep through gaps in the walls at odd angles, casting long, strange shadows that made the familiar surroundings feel almost alien. Prisoners would start their day with the same routine, rolling out the straw mats or blankets that barely cushioned their tired bodies, brushing their teeth with improvised tools or sometimes simply rinsing their mouths with cold water from shared basins, and lining up for the first ration of the day, which could be as little as a thin slice of bread and a cup of watery soup. The soup, often more symbolic than nourishing, was prepared in large iron cauldrons, and while it might have contained a few scraps of vegetables or bits of meat, its primary function was to sustain life, not comfort it. Prisoners quickly learned to savor every drop, to stretch each meal into something more than it was, because the rhythm of hunger would return relentlessly, reminding them of the fragility of existence in a place where control over one's life had been stripped away. In the barracks, whispers traveled faster than the guards' footsteps, and news, even if rumor or exaggerated, was precious. Someone might have seen a Red Cross package arrive, its contents a fleeting miracle of chocolate, powdered milk, or a small portion of meat, enough to set off a quiet celebration that would ripple through the barracks for hours, as each prisoner imagined the comforts of a home they hadn't seen in months, sometimes years. Daily life wasn't merely a sequence of hunger and waiting. Prisoners sought ways to occupy the endless hours, crafting small islands of normalcy in an ocean of confinement. They played chess with makeshift boards carved from scrap wood, wrote letters that might never be sent, shared stories of home that painted pictures far brighter than the gray walls surrounding them, and listened to smuggled radios when available, the crackling voices of the outside world offering both hope and despair in equal measure. Work details were another layer of reality. Prisoners were often marched to labor camps, fields, or factories, where under the watchful eyes of guards, they performed tasks meant to support the war effort. Yet these laborious routines became a measure of freedom, a chance to stretch aching muscles, feel the sun on their skin, or breathe the faint scent of earth and rain, sensations that reminded them they were alive, even in captivity. Evenings carried their own rhythm. After the grueling hours of work and minimal meals, men would gather in corners of the barracks to trade stories, play music with instruments fashioned from whatever was at hand, or simply sit in silence, listening to the soft murmurs of their fellow prisoners. Conversations could shift rapidly, from reminiscing about family and childhood adventures to plotting small acts of rebellion or escape, or speculating on the progress of the war beyond the barbed fences. Laughter, when it erupted, was fragile yet defiant, echoing off walls that had absorbed years of pain and quiet suffering, a reminder that even in the darkest conditions, the human spirit sought expression, even in the form of small jokes about the inadequacies of the soup or the oddities of camp life. Hygiene was a constant challenge, a battleground of its own. Bathing facilities were rudimentary, often nothing more than communal tubs or outdoor areas exposed to the elements, and soap was a luxury few could afford. Disease was a quiet, persistent threat, and prisoners learned to look after one another, forming informal networks of care, sharing what little they had, and watching over those who fell ill with an intensity born from the understanding that every life mattered in the tight confines of the camp. Rumors of escapes or acts of bravery spread quickly, sometimes growing into legends, And these stories became a source of collective morale, a reminder that beyond the fences, freedom and hope still existed, even if only in imagination. As night fell, the camp settled into a tense stillness, punctuated by the occasional bark of a guard's dog or the distant sounds of trains and artillery. Men lay on their straw mats, listening to the faint breathing of their neighbors, the creak of the barracks, the whispers of dreams mingling with reality. Sleep was elusive for some, a fragile companion for others, but always beneath the surface of fear, hunger, and monotony. There was resilience, a quiet determination to endure, to survive, to find meaning in a life that had been reduced to waiting, hoping, and enduring small victories of the spirit. Even in these constrained circumstances, there were small wonders. The taste of a hidden apple, the warmth of a stolen blanket, the fleeting joy of a letter from home, or the shared laughter over a clever trick played on a guard. Every day brought repetition, yet within that repetition, prisoners discovered ingenuity, solidarity, and an appreciation for the simplest acts that most people take for granted. The warmth of sunlight, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain against the roof, the comfort of a fellow human being's voice in the darkness. Life in a POW camp was a paradox, a mixture of relentless hardship and unexpected humanity, where survival was as much about physical endurance as it was about mental resilience, creativity, and connection. The monotony, however, was deceptive, for beneath it ran currents of tension, uncertainty, and occasional violence, moments when discipline or despair could erupt into chaos. Guards varied from indifferent to cruel, and the prisoners had to navigate these unpredictable dynamics, learning quickly whom to trust, when to stay silent, and how to preserve both dignity and life in an environment designed to strip them of both. And yet, amidst this precarious balance, communities formed, friendships were forged, and even small acts of defiance. A whispered joke, a hidden sketch, a covert game, became lifelines, threads connecting men to a sense of self that the walls and fences could never entirely erase. Morning light filtered through the narrow gaps in the wooden barracks walls, pale and uncertain, revealing the contours of tired faces pressed against rough blankets. Eyes heavy yet alert, ears attuned to the faintest stirrings beyond the camp. The air carried the scent of damp earth mixed with the lingering aroma of yesterday's soup, a constant reminder that life here was measured not in hours but in the endurance of small routines repeated endlessly, yet never entirely predictable. Conversations were low, cautious, sometimes erupting in sudden laughter over trivial observations. A bird outside the fence daring to chirp in defiance, or the way one of the guards' boots squeaked unpredictably on the gravel, but always tempered by the ever-present awareness that freedom remained tantalizingly out of reach. Breakfast was a brief ceremony of survival, a moment when men lined up silently to receive thin slices of bread and sometimes a bit of margarine or jam, treasures that would be rationed and guarded carefully, shared only when necessity demanded it or when trust had been earned over weeks or months of confinement. Men chewed slowly, almost ritualistically, aware that the act of eating could become a moment of subtle rebellion, a tiny assertion of autonomy within a world designed to deny them control. Some exchanged scraps of bread or dried fruit, bartering small privileges or information, while others simply watched, eyes scanning the camp, cataloging details that might one day prove useful, whether for escape plans, for avoiding trouble, or for understanding the strange hierarchy that had developed among the prisoners themselves. Work details were a significant part of the daily rhythm, often beginning mid-morning when the guards called names, and groups shuffled out toward fields, workshops, or distant factories. Labor varied, from breaking stones under the hot sun, carrying heavy loads that tested the limits of muscles already weakened by hunger, to more delicate work in workshops, where precision was demanded but the pace offered a slight respite from the relentless physical strain. These labor assignments were both a punishment and a lifeline. Prisoners would endure blisters, splinters, and aching backs, yet the opportunity to move, to breathe fresh air, even for a few hours, was a blessing that brought small relief, fleeting glimpses of the world beyond the fences, and rare but cherished interactions with other humans, sometimes even sympathetic locals who passed by, glimpses of normal life that felt impossibly distant yet intensely vital. Conversations during these work periods ranged from mundane complaints about the weight of stones or the unevenness of tools to elaborate recollections of home, hometowns, childhood memories, and imagined futures, each story layered with longing and a subtle defiance. Humor often surfaced here in unexpected ways, sometimes in a quietly sarcastic remark about a guard, or a joke shared in whispers, sometimes only understood by those standing closest. Yet it carried the fragile weight of hope, a reminder that even in confinement, minds could travel, could escape in ways bodies could not. Rumors circulated quickly, news of distant battles, of shifting front lines, of Red Cross packages or escapes elsewhere, which, whether accurate or not, provided a lifeline to the imagination, fueling daydreams, small acts of planning, and a continuous negotiation between reality and the possibilities of freedom. Meals remained minimal, yet prisoners adapted, learning to stretch rations creatively. Occasionally, a camp would receive fresh vegetables, a bit of meat, or preserves from parcels, and such moments became celebrations, quietly observed, with whispered thanks and careful sharing. Prisoners would swap portions, concoct soups, or simply savor the flavor as if tasting it for the first time, each bite layered with memories of home kitchens, smells of familiar spices, and the knowledge that these fleeting moments of abundance were rare and precious. Cooking was often improvised, a matter of necessity as much as ingenuity, and the communal act of preparing and sharing what little they had became a subtle form of solidarity, binding men together in ways that transcended rank or nationality. The afternoons were a blend of exhaustion and quiet ingenuity. Men carved small objects from scraps of wood or bone, wrote letters they might never send, or invented games that could occupy hours with little more than imagination and camaraderie. Music, when instruments were available, transformed barracks into spaces of transient beauty, the sound carrying through the thin walls, bringing smiles, fleeting tears, or silent contemplation. Creativity flourished in these moments, often emerging from scarcity. Someone would create a chess set from bottle caps, a map from torn paper, a story passed around from mouth to ear, evolving with each retelling, giving shape to experiences that could otherwise dissolve into monotony. Evening rituals were as much about mental survival as they were about physical. As darkness fell, guards made their rounds, barking commands, inspecting lines, ensuring compliance, and the prisoners settled into quiet routines, cleaning what little they could, performing minor repairs on shoes or clothing, or engaging in whispered conversations. Sleep, when it came, was fitful, punctuated by dreams of home, fleeting images of freedom, and the constant awareness of the unknown, the uncertainty of whether the next day would bring danger, relief, or simply another cycle of repetition. Small acts of kindness, a shared blanket, a whispered word of encouragement, a stolen piece of bread, became anchors, moments of humanity in a place designed to suppress it. Stories of escape attempts circulated endlessly, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes true, but always potent in their impact. Prisoners shared techniques, observations, and lessons learned, weaving together collective wisdom that could inform future efforts. These discussions were both practical and psychological, reinforcing bonds, sustaining morale, and providing a mental landscape of possibility, even when physical escape remained impossible. Each new plan, each whispered story, carried the weight of hope and risk intertwined, a delicate balance of imagination and courage. Through all of this, the smallest details became monumental. The warmth of sunlight on the barracks floor, the smell of rain on dry earth, the sound of a bird's call outside the wire, the shared laughter over a clever trick or a remembered joke. Life in captivity was a continuous negotiation between despair and resilience, monotony and ingenuity, restriction and imagination. Every day demanded adaptation, every interaction a measure of trust, every meal a reminder of fragility, and every act of creativity or defiance a quiet assertion that, despite the fences and guards, despite hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty, the human spirit remained stubbornly alive. Night often arrived quietly, yet with an intensity that made its presence undeniable, filling the barracks with shadows that stretched across rough wooden floors and straw-filled mattresses, where men lay in restless silence, listening to the faint creaks of the building and the distant echoes of footsteps on gravel. The darkness became a companion, revealing fears and memories with equal clarity, yet it also offered opportunities for subtle defiance. Some prisoners whispered stories that only those closest could hear, recounting family gatherings, landscapes remembered from childhood, or imagined adventures that took them far beyond the fences and guard towers. These tales, ephemeral and fragile, became a kind of lifeline, a way to preserve the self in a place where identities were constantly tested, eroded by monotony, hunger, and the relentless gaze of authority. Sleep, when it came, was fleeting. Many would lie awake for hours, listening to the rhythmic breathing of neighbors, counting the seconds between patrols, or replaying conversations from earlier in the day, sometimes with imagined outcomes far more satisfying than reality had allowed. Dreams were a curious mix of fear and nostalgia, often blurring the line between memory and desire. One could dream of a home kitchen, of smells and sounds that seemed impossibly distant, and wake to the harsh reality of the barracks smell of damp straw, cold metal, and the faint tang of unwashed bodies. Yet these dreams carried a power. They reminded men that the world outside the barbed wire existed, that freedom was not entirely lost, only deferred. Morning routines repeated with predictable irregularity, yet each day brought subtle differences, whether in the weather, the mood of the guards, or the availability of food and supplies. The bread might be thinner, the soup more watery, yet prisoners adapted, finding ways to make the rations last, trading portions, or saving scraps for later. Ingenuity became a survival skill. A bit of extra vegetable peel might be hidden for a clandestine soup, a crumb of chocolate from a rare parcel carefully divided, or even the tiniest portion of powdered milk hoarded to sweeten an otherwise bitter meal. These small acts of conservation and cleverness were not merely practical. They were assertions of control, demonstrations that, even in captivity, the mind could manipulate circumstances, find small victories, and maintain a sense of agency. Work details remained grueling, yet they also offered rare glimpses of movement beyond the camp walls, an opportunity to feel the wind, touch soil, and experience the world beyond confinement. Fields, forests, and factories became spaces of duality, places of punishment and opportunity, risk and relief. The tasks were often physically exhausting, yet conversation, laughter, and shared stories softened the monotony, creating a social fabric that bound men together. Observing the guards, noting patterns, and quietly discussing tactics for avoiding trouble or maximizing comfort became a subtle game, a mental exercise that engaged intellect in a way that labor alone could not. Every step outside the barracks carried both physical and psychological significance, a reminder that survival required alertness, resilience, and constant adaptation. Prisoners learned to cultivate routines that offered both comfort and distraction. Some formed informal reading groups, sharing whatever books or newspapers they could acquire through parcels or clandestine means, passing knowledge and stories from one to another. Others focused on craftsmanship, carving objects from wood, shaping metal scraps, or knitting and sewing clothing to patch worn garments. Music and improvisation flourished as well. A single violin string, a makeshift drum, or even a simple rhythm tapped out on benches could transform a dull evening into a shared experience of creativity and expression. These activities were more than diversion. They were mechanisms for maintaining mental health, for asserting individuality, and for fostering connection among men who shared the same confined, often oppressive environment. Hygiene remained a constant struggle. Cold showers or communal washing areas, when available, were insufficient for maintaining proper cleanliness, and illness could spread rapidly in the cramped, crowded conditions. Prisoners developed informal medical knowledge, sharing remedies and care practices, tending to wounds, fevers, and digestive issues with limited supplies. Cooperation and trust became essential. The survival of one often depended on the attentiveness of others and small gestures. Covering someone with a blanket, sharing a bit of sugar to calm stomach pain, or quietly tending to a fever carried immense significance. These acts of care created bonds, forming a fragile network of mutual reliance that sustained not only bodies but spirits. Rumors and news from the outside world permeated the camp, filtered through letters, smuggled papers, or conversations with prisoners recently transferred from other locations. Some of these reports were accurate. Others were exaggerated, distorted, or entirely fabricated, yet all had a psychological effect, shaping morale, inspiring hope, or fueling despair. Men would gather in small clusters to exchange information, speculate on the progress of battles, or imagine the liberation of territories far from the barbed wire. The uncertainty itself became a part of daily life, a backdrop against which every small decision, whether to share a portion of food, whisper a joke, or attempt an escape, was made with careful calculation. Evenings often carried an eerie duality, a sense of routine comfort paired with tension. Men settled into their mats, listening to the creak of the barracks and the distant sounds of the world beyond, whispering stories, engaging in quiet music, or planning future projects or small escapes. The barracks became a stage for imagination, where the harsh realities of confinement coexisted with fleeting moments of joy, creativity, and camaraderie. These interactions reinforced the notion that while physical freedom was denied, mental and emotional resilience could be nurtured, preserved, and even strengthened in the crucible of captivity. And yet, life in the camp was never entirely predictable. Occasional inspections, sudden punishments, or outbreaks of illness reminded prisoners that their world was precarious. They had to navigate these challenges constantly, balancing defiance with compliance, individuality with conformity, and hope with realism. Every day demanded vigilance, creativity, and courage, not only to survive but to preserve a sense of humanity that the conditions relentlessly tested. Even the smallest victories, a day without illness, a shared laugh, a piece of chocolate, a letter from home, became monumental, affirming that life, even in its most constrained form, could be meaningful, resilient, and profoundly human. The mornings in the camp often began with a muted rhythm, a mixture of groans, shuffling feet, and the distant barking of dogs, each sound a reminder that life was still confined, still under constant scrutiny. Yet, within this rigid routine, men found moments of quiet observation, noticing patterns in the guards' patrols, the way sunlight shifted across the yard, or the slight changes in weather that hinted at the passing seasons. These small details became a mental map of the world they could control, a fragile sense of order in an environment designed to strip control away. Some prisoners would rise early to perform exercises, stretch stiff limbs, or pace in corners, cultivating both physical endurance and a sense of agency in a place where freedom was otherwise denied. Breakfast, often more ritual than nourishment, was followed by a flurry of whispered plans and quiet negotiations. Men traded food, shared bits of news, or discussed minor grievances about the distribution of rations. These exchanges were more than idle chatter. They were essential to maintaining morale, fostering a sense of community, and navigating the complex hierarchy that existed among prisoners, where status could shift with a well-timed joke, a clever trick, or an act of generosity. The camp was a microcosm of society, where leadership and influence were earned through wit, reliability, and the subtle assertion of power, often in ways that went unnoticed by the guards but carried immense weight among those inside. Work details were relentless, yet even within the monotony of labor, men found pockets of resistance and creativity. Fields, workshops, and factory floors became arenas for subtle defiance, quiet acts that reaffirmed identity and agency. One could observe the rhythm of machines, the alignment of bricks, or the nuances of soil, finding satisfaction in precision or mastery, however limited. Conversations during labor ranged from strategic planning and recounting news from the front lines to shared recollections of childhood games, meals, and festivals, weaving together memory and imagination to form a tapestry that carried them beyond the barbed wire. Humor, often dark or sarcastic, surfaced spontaneously. A comment about a guard's habits, a joke about the monotony of work, or playful teasing that reinforced bonds among those enduring the same hardship. Meals, though sparse, were a focal point of social life. Prisoners adapted to their limited provisions by rationing cleverly, sharing scraps, or creating improvised recipes that stretched ingredients as far as possible. Soup might be enriched with foraged herbs, bits of bread, or even a tiny portion of hidden sugar, transforming a simple meal into a ritual of ingenuity. These culinary acts were a form of subtle rebellion, a way to assert control over a life otherwise dictated by external authority. Men who could cook, even minimally, became quietly respected, their abilities a source of admiration and occasional envy, as food was both sustenance and morale in the harsh landscape of captivity. Afternoons offered a mix of labor, creativity, and observation. Some prisoners devoted time to reading or writing, whether letters that might never be sent, personal journals, or scraps of poetry and stories exchanged in secret. Others focused on craftsmanship, carving objects from wood, fashioning tools, or repairing clothing. Music and rhythm, improvised from instruments or even objects at hand, became a powerful outlet for emotion, allowing men to express longing, humor, or shared frustration in a medium that transcended words. These moments were fleeting yet precious, small islands of beauty and connection in a landscape dominated by control, scarcity, and uncertainty. Hygiene, always challenging, was an ever-present concern. Cold showers, communal washing areas, and limited supplies made cleanliness a daily struggle. Illnesses, often minor, sometimes life-threatening, spread quickly in such conditions, and prisoners developed informal medical knowledge, sharing remedies, tending wounds, and looking after one another with an intensity born from necessity. Simple acts of care, a bandage applied carefully, a blanket draped over a shivering comrade, a whispered word of reassurance, carried profound significance, reinforcing bonds of trust and mutual reliance. Survival depended not only on physical endurance, but on the cultivation of empathy, vigilance, and cooperation within a constrained and often hostile environment. News from the outside world, whether through smuggled newspapers, letters, or word of mouth, was eagerly consumed and discussed. Rumors, reports of battles, or the arrival of Red Cross parcels could change the mood of an entire barracks, fueling hope or stoking anxiety. Prisoners learned to evaluate information carefully, weighing credibility and relevance, and often engaged in elaborate discussions that combined strategy, speculation, and imagination. This mental engagement was critical. It kept minds active, sharpened awareness, and fostered resilience, a reminder that survival required both body and mind. Evening routines were punctuated by the subtle rhythms of community. Men gathered to play games, tell stories, share music, or simply sit in contemplative silence. The barracks, dimly lit and filled with the sounds of whispered conversation and occasional laughter, became a space where bonds were reinforced, strategies were exchanged, and the human spirit asserted itself against confinement. Some evenings carried heightened tension, inspections, punishments, or outbreaks of illness. But even in these moments, subtle acts of defiance or cooperation emerged, demonstrating that adaptability, creativity, and solidarity were as vital to survival as physical strength or cunning. As darkness deepened, thoughts often turned inward, to memories of home, imagined escapes, or the faint hope of liberation. Dreams were a sanctuary, a space where men could reclaim a sense of agency and possibility, imagining landscapes, faces, and experiences long denied. And yet, even in sleep, the barracks whispered reminders of captivity. The distant bark of dogs, the scrape of boots, the faint murmur of fellow prisoners. But these reminders did not extinguish resilience. They coexisted with imagination, humor, and solidarity, creating a delicate balance that allowed men to endure, to retain identity, and to find meaning even in a world designed to strip it away. Life in the camp was paradoxical, defined by scarcity, constraint, and monotony, yet rich in ingenuity, adaptation, and human connection. Every day brought repetition and uncertainty, yet within this structure, prisoners cultivated creativity, compassion, and resilience. Simple acts, sharing food, crafting an object, telling a story, performing a small kindness, became monumental achievements, reinforcing the idea that even in captivity, humanity could thrive, and that survival was as much a mental and emotional endeavor as it was a physical one. The days in the camp flowed with a peculiar rhythm, a mixture of monotony and unpredictability that shaped every thought, every interaction, and every small decision. Sunlight spilling through cracks in the barracks walls illuminated the worn faces of men who had grown accustomed to endurance, their eyes holding both fatigue and a quiet determination, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished despite months or years of confinement. Some rose early, stretching stiff muscles and pacing quietly along the narrow walkways, finding solace in the simple act of movement, in the ability to measure time by steps rather than by the ticking of a clock or the commands of a guard. Breakfast remained minimal, yet it carried significance far beyond nourishment. A thin slice of bread, a watery soup, or a small piece of preserved meat was distributed with meticulous care, often rationed and traded to ensure that each man could stretch his meager provisions. Sharing became a subtle currency, with scraps of food exchanged for favors, news, or simple camaraderie. Men learned to plan meals strategically, saving a portion of a ration for later, or enhancing a basic soup with whatever herbs or remnants could be found, transforming sustenance into an act of ingenuity and defiance. These small victories in rationing and preparation were crucial, reinforcing the sense that while physical freedom was denied, intellectual and emotional agency remained intact. Work details punctuated the mornings and afternoons, ranging from backbreaking labor in fields and workshops to the more meticulous tasks of factory work, where precision and concentration were paramount. Each assignment was both a test and an opportunity, a test of endurance, patience, and adaptability, and an opportunity to exercise observation, skill, and cooperation with fellow prisoners. Conversations during these labor periods ranged from practical advice about avoiding punishment to recounting memories of home or speculating about events beyond the camp, blending hope with strategy, imagination with survival. Humor often surfaced as a quiet rebellion, a way to assert identity and maintain morale in the face of unrelenting discipline and deprivation. In the afternoons, when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the yard, men found ways to occupy their minds and spirits. Some read or wrote, using smuggled books, newspapers, or scraps of paper to explore ideas, craft letters, or document experiences that might otherwise fade. Others engaged in crafts, carving wood, fashioning tools, or repairing clothing, transforming limited materials into objects of utility or beauty. Music and improvisation remained vital lifelines. A tune tapped on a table, a string plucked from a violin, or a makeshift drumbeat carried across the barracks, uniting men in shared rhythm, lifting spirits, and creating a transient sense of freedom. These creative acts were not mere diversion. They were essential strategies for preserving mental health, fostering connection, and asserting individuality in a world designed to suppress it. Hygiene continued to challenge prisoners' resilience. Cold showers, crowded washing facilities, and limited soap made cleanliness a struggle, and the spread of illness was an ever-present concern. Informal medical knowledge became a lifeline. Men tended to wounds, fevers, and digestive ailments using limited resources, sharing remedies and strategies. Caring for one another forged deep bonds and simple gestures, covering a shivering comrade, administering a makeshift remedy, offering a comforting word, became acts of profound humanity, reinforcing the understanding that survival depended not only on individual endurance but on mutual support. News from the outside world arrived sporadically, often filtered through letters, smuggled newspapers, or prisoners recently transferred from other camps. Some reports were accurate, others exaggerated or fabricated, yet all influenced morale. Rumors of advancing fronts, the arrival of Red Cross parcels, or stories of successful escapes provided hope and stimulated the imagination. Prisoners discussed these reports with intensity, analyzing credibility, comparing experiences, and incorporating lessons into their mental maps of strategy and survival. The ability to think critically, anticipate outcomes, and plan, even in small ways, became an essential skill, reinforcing a sense of control over a life otherwise dominated by external forces. Evenings in the camp carried their own rhythm, a mixture of tension and fleeting relief. Men gathered quietly, playing games, telling stories, sharing music, or simply reflecting in silence. Laughter, often subdued, echoed through the barracks, a fragile yet vital assertion of humanity. Inspections, occasional punishments, or outbreaks of illness reminded everyone of the constant fragility of their environment. Yet even in these moments, prisoners found subtle ways to resist, adapt, and maintain dignity. Whispered conversations, small acts of defiance, and creative endeavors became tools for psychological survival, reinforcing a sense of identity and resilience amidst constraint. Sleep offered both respite and complexity. Dreams intertwined memory and longing, conjuring images of home, imagined escapes, and lives beyond the fences. Yet waking moments often collided sharply with reality. The smell of damp straw, the metallic tang of the air, the distant bark of dogs, and the creak of boots reminded prisoners that freedom remained deferred. And yet, even under these conditions, human ingenuity and solidarity persisted. Men shared food, crafted objects, exchanged stories, and cared for one another, cultivating resilience that was as essential as the physical endurance required to survive. Life in the camp was a continuous negotiation between despair and hope, monotony and creativity, restriction and resilience. Every day brought new challenges, yet within these constraints, prisoners discovered resourcefulness, empathy, and community. Small victories, a well-prepared meal, a piece of music, a repaired garment, a shared joke, became monumental, affirming that life, even in its harshest form, could be meaningful, connected, and profoundly human. The relentless passage of time, though often measured in repetition, was punctuated by these acts of endurance, defiance, and imagination, creating a living tapestry of experience, memory, and hope that sustained men through the long days and nights of captivity. Dawn often arrived silently, painting the barracks in muted shades of gray and gold, illuminating the faces of men who had become intimately familiar with the rhythm of confinement. Each line increased, telling stories of endurance, loss, and fleeting triumphs. Even the act of waking carried weight. The decision to rise from a thin straw mat, to confront the cold air and the sounds of the camp, to face another day of uncertainty, required more than physical strength. It demanded a resilience of mind, a readiness to navigate a world where each moment could shift unpredictably between routine and crisis. Men rose in silence, performing small personal rituals, stretching stiff limbs, scanning the yard, whispering a word or two to a neighbor, or simply taking a moment to breathe in the crisp morning air and acknowledge, however quietly, that they were still alive. Breakfast, though meager, remained a central ritual, a marker of time and a test of patience. The thin slices of bread, occasionally accompanied by a watery soup or a few scraps of vegetables, were consumed slowly, deliberately, often accompanied by quiet conversation or the silent negotiation of small trades. Every crumb had value, every sip of liquid was carefully measured, and the act of sharing, even the smallest portion, was both a practical strategy and an affirmation of solidarity. Men observed one another, learned habits and preferences, and developed informal systems of support, knowing that survival was entwined with the ability to cooperate, to anticipate needs, and to protect the fragile sense of community that had emerged within the confines of the camp. Work details began soon after, ranging from grueling labor in the fields to meticulous tasks in workshops or factories. The physical exertion was unrelenting, yet within these tasks lay opportunities for subtle mastery, for observation, and for mental engagement. Prisoners noted patterns in the guards' movements, analyzed the rhythm of machinery, or quietly shared tips on efficiency and endurance. Conversations blended practical advice, news from distant fronts, and stories of home, forming a continuous narrative that connected the past, present, and imagined future. Humor, often dry or sardonic, punctuated these moments, reinforcing camaraderie and allowing men to assert identity and agency in ways that authority could not entirely suppress. Afternoons offered moments of both respite and creativity. Men carved objects from wood, repaired shoes and clothing, or wrote letters that might never reach their intended recipients, filling the hours with acts of craftsmanship and reflection. Improvised games, music, and storytelling provided additional outlets for expression, turning otherwise monotonous spaces into arenas for imagination and connection. Even a simple rhythm tapped on a table, a melody played on a makeshift instrument, or a whispered tale could lift spirits, forge bonds, and assert a quiet form of freedom in a world dominated by confinement and control. These acts of creativity were not merely diversions, they were essential to psychological survival, reinforcing identity and sustaining hope in an environment designed to erode both. Hygiene remained a constant challenge. Communal showers, limited water, and inadequate soap made cleanliness difficult, and the spread of illness was an ever-present threat. Prisoners relied on informal knowledge, tending to wounds, fevers, and digestive ailments with ingenuity and care. Small acts of kindness, covering a shivering comrade, sharing a bit of sugar to soothe nausea, offering reassurance, became acts of profound humanity, reinforcing the bonds that allowed individuals to endure. Trust and vigilance were interwoven. Survival depended on both attentiveness and empathy, on the ability to navigate social complexities and anticipate the needs of others. News from the outside world, delivered through letters, newspapers, or word of mouth, provided both hope and anxiety. Accurate or distorted, each piece of information carried significance, shaping morale and influencing behavior. Prisoners discussed rumors, evaluated credibility, and incorporated knowledge into mental strategies for survival. Anticipation of parcels, updates from families, or reports of distant battles became focal points of attention, prompting reflection, planning, and quiet discussion. The mental engagement fostered by these exchanges was as vital as physical endurance, cultivating resilience, strategic thinking, and a sense of continuity in a world otherwise defined by constraint and uncertainty. Evenings brought a mixture of tension and solace. The barracks, dimly lit and filled with murmurs, music, and quiet laughter, became a space where camaraderie and creativity flourished. Men played games, told stories, and shared reflections on both ordinary and extraordinary experiences, reinforcing social bonds and asserting agency in subtle yet meaningful ways. Inspections and occasional punishments served as reminders of vulnerability, yet within these moments, prisoners found opportunities for subtle defiance, cooperation, and expression of individuality. The interplay of risk, creativity, and community defined the rhythm of life, underscoring the resilience of the human spirit in even the harshest conditions. Nighttime was both refuge and reminder. Dreams intertwined memory, desire, and imagination, conjuring visions of home, freedom, and landscapes beyond the fences. Waking brought the tangible reality of confinement, the smell of straw, the chill in the air, the distant barking of dogs. But these reminders did not extinguish hope. They coexisted with imagination, humor, and solidarity, creating a delicate balance that sustained men's spirits, reinforced bonds, and allowed them to endure. Small victories, shared food, a successful game, a letter read aloud, a song quietly sung, became monumental achievements, affirming that life, even in captivity, could be meaningful, resilient, and profoundly human. Life in the camp was a continuous negotiation of endurance, creativity, and emotional survival. Repetition, scarcity, and uncertainty defined each day. Yet within these constraints, prisoners discovered ingenuity, solidarity, and a persistent sense of hope. Acts that might seem minor outside, crafting, sharing, laughing, storytelling, became central to survival, reinforcing identity and sustaining the human spirit. The interplay of routine and imagination, constraint and defiance, despair and hope, wove a tapestry of experience, memory, and resilience, a living testament to the capacity for adaptation and humanity under the harshest conditions. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp as the men stirred from their restless sleep, muscles stiff and bodies aching from nights spent on straw-filled mattresses. The cold air carried the faint scent of damp earth mixed with the lingering aroma of yesterday's soup, a combination that had become the background of their daily existence. Some men rose immediately, stretching and pacing along narrow paths between barracks, while others lingered under the thin blankets, savoring a few more moments of warmth before the demands of another day imposed themselves. The routine, though familiar, never lost its subtle unpredictability. A sudden command, an unexpected inspection, or the shifting mood of a guard could transform the ordinary into the urgent without warning. Breakfast was served with quiet efficiency, a thin slice of bread, occasionally paired with watery soup or a small portion of margarine, distributed carefully to ensure minimal waste. Every morsel was precious, and prisoners had learned to ration strategically, hiding small portions for later, sharing with those in need, or trading with comrades to gain something essential, whether food, information, or simple comfort. Conversations during these moments were low and cautious, yet laced with humor and subtle defiance. A shared joke about a guard, a playful remark about the monotony of meals, or an observation about the weather outside. These interactions were more than trivial. They were vital threads in the fabric of community, reinforcing bonds and maintaining morale in an environment designed to strip both away. Work details followed soon after, ranging from labor-intensive assignments in the fields to intricate tasks in workshops or factories. The work was physically demanding, yet it offered rare opportunities for mental engagement and subtle resistance. Men observed the patterns of guards, the operation of machines, and the layout of the camp, storing knowledge that could be applied for small advantages or potential escape attempts. Conversations blended practical advice, news from distant fronts, personal memories, and imagined futures, creating a continuous narrative that connected the present to what once was and what might be. Humor persisted, often in the form of sardonic commentary or whispered jokes, serving as both social glue and psychological refuge, a way to assert agency in a space designed to suppress it. Afternoons were a mix of labor, learning, and creative endeavor. Prisoners repaired clothing, carved objects from wood or bone, and wrote letters or journals that might never leave the camp but preserved memory and identity. Music and storytelling flourished despite scarcity. A single violin string, a makeshift drum, or the tap of fingers on a wooden table became powerful tools for expression, allowing men to share emotion, reinforce bonds, and momentarily transcend the confines of their environment. Games were played with improvised materials, strategies were tested, and the imagination became a lifeline, a space where rules could be bent and possibilities explored, even if only temporarily. These acts of creativity and social interaction were not mere distractions. They were essential strategies for sustaining mental health, reinforcing identity, and fostering a sense of control within a tightly constrained world. Hygiene remained an ongoing challenge. Limited access to water, crowded communal facilities, and minimal soap made cleanliness a daily struggle. Illness spread easily, and men relied on informal medical knowledge and shared remedies to tend wounds, fevers, and digestive issues. Acts of care: applying a bandage, sharing a small portion of medicinal herbs, or simply offering a comforting word, carried profound significance. They reinforced trust, built mutual reliance, and affirmed the human capacity for empathy even under conditions designed to erode it. Survival was inseparable from community, and each act of support strengthened the fragile social bonds that sustained both body and spirit. News from the outside world, whether through smuggled letters, newspapers, or prisoners newly arrived from other camps, shaped perception, morale, and hope. Reports of distant battles, parcel arrivals, or rumored escapes circulated rapidly, sometimes accurate, sometimes exaggerated or false, yet always potent. Prisoners evaluated credibility, discussed implications, and integrated these narratives into their daily strategies, allowing the mind to explore possibilities beyond the camp fences. This engagement of intellect and imagination became as vital as physical endurance, reinforcing resilience, fostering hope, and sustaining a sense of agency in a life otherwise defined by constraint. Evenings carried both tension and opportunity. Inspections, punishments, and the unpredictable presence of guards reminded prisoners of the ever-present risk, while quiet moments of camaraderie offered respite and emotional nourishment. Men gathered in dimly lit corners to play games, tell stories, or quietly share music, forging a sense of shared experience and maintaining individuality. Small victories, a successfully prepared meal, a shared joke, a repaired garment, or a whispered tale, assumed monumental importance, asserting the continued presence of humanity in a place designed to suppress it. The barracks became a sanctuary of imagination and resilience, where psychological survival was as important as physical endurance. Night brought reflection, dreams, and memory. Men visualized home landscapes, imagined reunions with loved ones, or contemplated escapes that might never materialize. Sleep was fitful yet necessary, a respite from the relentless physical and mental strain. Even the harsh reminders of captivity, the smell of straw, the chill in the air, distant dogs, and the echo of boots, could not extinguish the subtle warmth of hope, creativity, and solidarity cultivated throughout the day. Every act of ingenuity, cooperation, and quiet defiance reinforced identity and sustained morale, demonstrating the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Life in the camp was a delicate interplay of endurance, creativity, and emotional survival. Repetition, scarcity, and uncertainty defined the days. Yet prisoners found ways to assert control, preserve individuality, and cultivate resilience. Simple actions, crafting, sharing, storytelling, or laughing, became acts of profound significance, sustaining both mind and body. The rhythm of daily life, punctuated by ingenuity, camaraderie, and subtle defiance, wove a continuous tapestry of experience, memory, and hope, illustrating that even in the harshest confinement, humanity could persist, adapt, and endure. The early light of dawn crept into the barracks, filtering through cracks in the walls and casting long, pale beams over the worn mats where men slept, some in restless positions, others curled tightly against the chill that never fully lifted. The air was thick with the scent of straw, sweat, and lingering remnants of yesterday's meals, a constant reminder of the confined, harsh environment in which life persisted. Yet within this bleak landscape, routines were established, small victories found, and a delicate balance maintained between survival and maintaining one's sense of self. Men rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs, pacing the narrow walkways between barracks, and exchanging whispered greetings that carried far more meaning than their brevity suggested. A subtle acknowledgement of shared endurance, of presence, and of humanity that remained unbroken. Breakfast, modest as ever, was consumed with careful attention. Thin bread, sometimes paired with a watery soup, was rationed, traded, and savored with precision. Prisoners had learned to stretch these minimal provisions, hiding small portions for later or exchanging crumbs for information or small favors, understanding that these seemingly trivial acts could be the difference between comfort and discomfort, between a fleeting sense of control and the helplessness imposed by the camp. Conversations were low, cautious, and yet often laced with humor, dark, sardonic, or playful. A subtle form of rebellion that helped sustain morale, assert individuality, and remind everyone that the human spirit could not be entirely contained. Work details followed, varying from physically demanding labor in the fields to meticulous, repetitive tasks in workshops or makeshift factories. Labor was both punishing and meditative. The rhythm of work allowed men to observe, calculate, and plan in ways that were unnoticed by guards. They noted patrol patterns, identified moments of relative freedom, and occasionally shared strategies or knowledge quietly, fostering subtle cooperation and trust. Conversations during labor ranged from practical guidance on tasks, to news from the outside world, to recollections of home and imagined futures, creating a continuous mental narrative that sustained morale and reinforced connection to life beyond the fences. Humor and ingenuity permeated even the most menial tasks, providing small victories that bolstered self-esteem and social cohesion. Afternoons brought a mixture of routine, creativity, and observation. Prisoners devoted time to repairing clothing, crafting objects from wood, bone, or metal scraps, and writing letters or journals that preserved memory, identity, and sometimes hope. Music, a sparse but cherished element of camp life, thrived in these moments. A violin string, a drum improvised from discarded materials, or simply rhythmically tapping a table could transform a drab evening into a shared experience of expression, imagination, and psychological relief. Games and storytelling further reinforced bonds, allowing men to explore scenarios, imagine alternatives, and share knowledge. These acts, whether artistic, strategic, or playful, were essential mechanisms for sustaining both mental and emotional well-being in an environment designed to suppress initiative, creativity, and connection. Hygiene remained a relentless challenge. Showers were cold, facilities overcrowded, and soap scarce. Illness spread quickly, and men relied on informal knowledge and shared remedies to care for wounds, fevers, or digestive ailments. Small gestures of support, a bandage applied carefully, a blanket offered, a word of comfort, carried immense significance, reinforcing bonds of trust and mutual reliance. Survival depended not only on endurance but on vigilance, empathy, and the ability to navigate the social dynamics of the barracks, understanding that cooperation and attentiveness were as vital as physical strength in maintaining health and morale. Information from the outside world circulated cautiously. Smuggled letters, newspapers, and reports from transferred prisoners shaped perception, influencing morale and fostering hope. While some information was reliable, much was distorted or exaggerated. Yet even rumors provided mental engagement, discussion, and speculation, creating a narrative that extended beyond the camp. Men evaluated the credibility of news, debated possible outcomes, and integrated insights into their daily strategies for survival, sustaining a sense of agency in a life defined by external control. These discussions, blending fact, speculation, and imagination, became a critical part of mental survival, stimulating intellect and offering the illusion of choice and foresight. Evening in the barracks carried a delicate balance between tension and comfort. Inspections, punishments, and the unpredictable presence of guards reminded prisoners of vulnerability, yet moments of camaraderie and quiet amusement persisted. Music, games, and storytelling became central to social cohesion and emotional resilience. Laughter, whispers, and shared small victories, such as a repaired garment, a cleverly rationed meal, or an exchanged story, reinforced identity and humanity. These interactions created a temporary sanctuary, a space where creativity, solidarity, and psychological survival could flourish, offering glimpses of freedom and self-expression in a confined world. Nighttime introduced reflection and dreams, intertwining memory, hope, and imagination. Prisoners visualized landscapes from home, imagined reunions with loved ones, or contemplated escapes that may never come to fruition. Even the harsh realities of captivity, the cold, the straw, the distant noises, coexisted with the warmth of solidarity, creativity, and resilience cultivated throughout the day. Each small act of ingenuity, cooperation, or subtle defiance reinforced identity and sustained morale, demonstrating that human spirit could endure, adapt, and even thrive under the most constrained circumstances. Life in the camp was an intricate weave of endurance, creativity, social interaction, and psychological survival. Repetition, scarcity, and uncertainty defined the environment. Yet within these constraints, prisoners discovered resourcefulness, empathy, and hope. Small actions, crafting, sharing, storytelling, music, and laughter, took on monumental significance, sustaining both body and mind. The continuous rhythm of daily life, punctuated by acts of ingenuity, solidarity, and quiet defiance, created a tapestry of experience, resilience, and humanity that endured despite the harshest confinement, illustrating the remarkable capacity of individuals to preserve identity, connection, and hope even when freedom was denied. The first light of morning arrived with a soft glow, seeping through the cracks in the barracks walls, and with it came the subtle hum of awakening life within the camp. Men shifted on straw-stuffed mats, some stretching limbs stiff from the night, others rising slowly, savoring the fleeting warmth beneath thin blankets before stepping into the cold, biting air. Each movement was deliberate, a conscious acknowledgement of both vulnerability and endurance. Despite the monotony of daily existence, the prisoners developed rituals that infused the day with purpose. Pacing the narrow walkways, counting steps as a measure of time, scanning the yard for small shifts in the environment, and exchanging whispered words with neighbors, a subtle affirmation of shared experience and mutual recognition of survival. Breakfast was a ritual in itself, more about communal rhythm than nourishment. Thin slices of bread, occasionally paired with a bit of watery soup or a small ration of margarine, were distributed with precision, carefully rationed, and sometimes secretly traded among men. Sharing these meager resources became a silent testament to solidarity, each act of generosity reinforcing bonds, building trust, and providing a small sense of control in a world dominated by scarcity and external authority. Conversations during meals were measured yet lively, often infused with humor, wit, and subtle commentary on guards, routines, or camp events, a quiet assertion of identity and resilience that carried profound psychological weight. Work followed, demanding both physical strength and mental acuity. Tasks ranged from strenuous labor in the fields to meticulous assignments in workshops or factories, where the rhythm of repetition became both challenge and solace. Men observed carefully, noting patterns in the guards' movements, changes in weather, or the functioning of machines, storing this knowledge for minor advantages or moments of subtle resistance. Dialogue flowed between laborers, blending practical guidance, news from outside the camp, recollections of home, and speculation about the future, creating a continuous narrative that reinforced social cohesion, strategy, and hope. Humor remained a lifeline, emerging in quiet jokes, sardonic commentary, or playful banter, sustaining morale and preserving a sense of self in a tightly controlled environment. Afternoons offered both opportunity and reprieve. Prisoners turned to crafting, repairing clothing, carving objects from wood or bone, or writing letters and journals that preserved memory, identity, and sometimes hope. Improvised music and storytelling flourished, even when resources were scarce. A single string plucked on a violin, a rhythm tapped on a table, or a whispered tale could transform the barracks into a space of creativity and shared experience. Games and collaborative projects reinforced camaraderie, sharpened strategy, and provided moments of diversion, demonstrating the essential role of imagination and ingenuity in sustaining mental and emotional health amidst confinement. These activities were not mere distractions. They became vital lifelines, reinforcing agency, identity, and resilience in an environment designed to strip both away. Hygiene remained a constant struggle. Limited access to water, overcrowded washing areas, and sparse soap made cleanliness difficult, increasing vulnerability to illness. Prisoners relied on informal medical knowledge, tending to wounds, fevers, and digestive ailments with ingenuity and care. Small gestures, covering a shivering comrade, sharing a few drops of water, offering a comforting word, carried immense significance, strengthening trust, mutual dependence, and emotional resilience. Survival in this environment demanded both physical endurance and the cultivation of empathy, awareness, and cooperation, revealing the interdependence of body, mind, and social bonds in sustaining life. Information from outside, arriving via smuggled letters, newspapers, or new prisoners, influenced mood, hope, and morale. Some reports were factual, others exaggerated or unreliable, yet all served as a stimulus for discussion, reflection, and imagination. Men analyzed news, debated its credibility, and incorporated insights into daily strategies, finding meaning and agency in the midst of imposed confinement. These exchanges provided mental stimulation, a sense of connection to the larger world, and a narrative that extended beyond barbed wire and stone, reminding prisoners that even in captivity, their minds remained free to explore, reflect, and anticipate. Evenings in the camp oscillated between tension and temporary solace. Inspections, punishments, and the unpredictable movements of guards underscored vulnerability, while moments of camaraderie, music, games, and storytelling offered brief reprieves. Laughter, whispers, and small victories, a cleverly rationed meal, a repaired garment, a shared joke, or an improvised song, reinforced identity, solidarity, and psychological resilience. The barracks became a sanctuary for imagination, social cohesion, and subtle resistance, a place where prisoners could reclaim fragments of agency and assert their humanity. Night brought reflection, dreams, and imagination, intertwining memory, hope, and longing. Prisoners visualized landscapes from home, imagined reunions with family, or contemplated escapes that may never come to fruition. The harsh realities of captivity, the cold, the straw, the distant barking of dogs, and the echo of boots were ever present, yet they coexisted with creativity, solidarity, and resilience. Every small act of ingenuity, cooperation, or subtle defiance reinforced identity, sustained morale, and provided psychological fortitude, illustrating the remarkable persistence of human spirit even in the harshest conditions. Life in the camp was a continuous negotiation of endurance, creativity, social interaction, and emotional survival. Scarcity, repetition, and uncertainty defined existence. Yet within these constraints, prisoners discovered resourcefulness, empathy, and hope. Small actions, crafting, sharing, storytelling, music, laughter, took on monumental significance, sustaining both mind and body. The rhythm of daily life, punctuated by acts of ingenuity, solidarity, and subtle defiance, wove a continuous tapestry of experience, resilience, and humanity, demonstrating that even under the harshest conditions, identity, connection, and hope could endure. The camp seemed to awaken slowly, as though even the air itself hesitated before another day of confinement began. Sunlight crept through the gaps in the wooden barracks, illuminating the worn faces of men whose eyes had grown accustomed to endurance, alertness, and the delicate balance between hope and despair. Each movement was purposeful. A stretch to ease stiff joints, a slow walk along the narrow paths, a whispered exchange with a neighbor, all small rituals designed to maintain a sense of agency in a place where autonomy had been stripped away. The air carried the mingled sense of straw, damp earth, and the faint remnants of yesterday's soup, a constant reminder of the environment, harsh and unrelenting, yet strangely familiar over time. Breakfast followed, modest yet ritualistic, a thin slice of bread with occasional soup or a small portion of margarine. Each morsel was valued, savored, and often rationed, with prisoners carefully hiding or trading portions for other necessities. The act of sharing food became more than mere sustenance. It was an affirmation of solidarity, a demonstration of trust, and a subtle assertion of humanity. Conversations were low but rich, filled with humor, anecdotes, and subtle commentary about the guards or the unfolding life within the camp. These exchanges reinforced bonds, strengthened morale, and reminded men that even in confinement, community and identity persisted. Work details consumed the mornings and often part of the afternoons. Assignments ranged from strenuous labor in the fields to meticulous, repetitive tasks in workshops or factories. Physical exertion was constant, yet within these tasks lay opportunities for mental engagement and subtle strategy. Men observed guards' patterns, studied machinery, and shared knowledge quietly, learning from one another and occasionally gaining small advantages. Discussions interwove practical advice, personal memories, news from the outside world, and speculation about future events, creating a continuous mental narrative that nurtured hope, reinforced camaraderie, and allowed the imagination to roam even within strict confines. Humor, often sardonic or playful, served as a coping mechanism, providing relief, bonding, and a subtle form of defiance against the oppressive atmosphere. Afternoons offered spaces for creativity, reflection, and psychological survival. Prisoners repaired clothing, carved wooden or bone objects, and wrote journals or letters that may never leave the camp but preserved memory, identity, and sometimes hope. Music flourished with scarcity. A single string plucked, a rhythm tapped on wood, or a softly hummed tune created connection, emotional release, and a fleeting sense of freedom. Storytelling and games further reinforced social bonds, allowing men to explore scenarios, imagine possibilities, and share knowledge, offering mental stimulation and distraction from monotony. These small acts of creativity, collaboration, and play were not trivial. They were essential to maintaining morale, fostering resilience, and asserting individuality in a system designed to suppress both. Hygiene remained a daily challenge. Cold, overcrowded facilities, and limited water or soap increased vulnerability to illness. Informal medical knowledge became vital. Men tended wounds, fevers, and digestive ailments with ingenuity and care. Acts of kindness, covering a shivering comrade, sharing water, offering reassurance, strengthened trust, reinforced social bonds, and affirmed humanity within a setting structured to erode it. Survival depended on both physical endurance and the capacity to navigate social relationships with care, empathy, and strategic awareness. News from the outside, delivered sporadically through letters, newspapers, or new prisoners, shaped perception, hope, and morale. Accurate or exaggerated, each piece carried significance. Rumors of advancing fronts, parcel deliveries, or escapes circulated rapidly, prompting discussion, analysis, and imaginative speculation. Prisoners debated credibility, considered implications, and integrated new knowledge into daily life, sustaining a sense of mental freedom and agency despite physical confinement. This intellectual engagement, often shared in quiet conversation, became as essential as the labor and daily routines, providing connection to a larger world beyond barbed wire and stone walls. Evenings carried a delicate mixture of tension and solace. Inspections, punishments, and unpredictable guard movements underscored vulnerability, yet quiet camaraderie, music, storytelling, and games offered emotional relief and reinforcement of identity. Laughter, whispered jokes, shared victories. A cleverly rationed meal, a repaired garment, a small act of creativity became central to social cohesion, resilience, and a subtle assertion of freedom. The barracks became a sanctuary, a space for imagination, human connection, and psychological survival amidst the strict control imposed by the camp. Nighttime brought reflection, dreams, and memory, Prisoners envisioned landscapes from home, imagined reunions with loved ones, or contemplated escapes that might never materialize. The harsh realities of confinement, the chill, the straw, the distant sounds of guards and dogs, coexisted with the warmth of solidarity, creativity, and subtle resistance. Every small act of ingenuity, cooperation, or defiance reinforced identity, sustained morale, and cultivated resilience, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of human beings to endure, adapt, and retain hope even in extreme adversity. Life in the camp was a continuous negotiation between endurance, creativity, social interaction, and emotional survival. Scarcity, monotony, and uncertainty defined each day. Yet within these constraints, prisoners found resourcefulness, empathy, and hope. Small acts, crafting, sharing, storytelling, music, laughter, took on profound significance, sustaining mind, body, and spirit. The rhythm of daily life, interwoven with ingenuity, solidarity, and subtle defiance, wove a living tapestry of experience, resilience, and humanity, illustrating that even under the harshest conditions, identity, connection, and hope could endure. The first faint light of day filtered through the cracks in the barracks, casting long, thin beams across straw-stuffed mattresses and illuminating the worn faces of men who had grown accustomed to the rhythm of confinement. Each line increased, speaking of endurance, loss, and the quiet persistence of hope. The morning air was crisp, carrying the mingled scents of damp straw, cold earth, and the lingering aroma of yesterday's meager meals. Every movement was deliberate, stretching stiff limbs, pacing narrow walkways, whispering brief greetings, and performing small rituals that maintained a sense of self and continuity. Even in monotony, there was a rhythm, a delicate balance between survival and the subtle assertion of identity, the invisible threads of agency that tethered men to their humanity. Breakfast, thin and sparse, was a careful, almost ceremonial act. Bread, sometimes accompanied by watery soup or a small portion of margarine, was consumed slowly, measured against the day's expected exertion, sometimes hidden or traded for other small necessities, a practice both practical and symbolic. Sharing food became a reaffirmation of solidarity, a gesture of trust, and a quiet act of rebellion against the harshness of imposed scarcity. Conversations during these moments were subdued yet vibrant, filled with humor, observations, or reflections on camp life, creating an invisible network of mental and emotional support, subtly defying the isolation and control of the camp structure. Work details followed swiftly, shaping the day with relentless demands. Labor ranged from physically taxing tasks in the fields to repetitive, precise assignments in workshops or factories. While physically draining, the routine of work allowed men to exercise mental acuity, observing guards' patterns, noting machinery operations, or quietly devising small strategies for efficiency and advantage. Dialogue blended guidance on labor tasks, personal memories, news from the outside, and speculative imaginings of future life, reinforcing social bonds, stimulating thought, and nurturing hope. Humor, often dark, sardonic, or ironic, persisted as a coping mechanism, sustaining morale and reinforcing camaraderie in an environment structured to suppress individuality and initiative. Afternoons offered both challenge and opportunity. Prisoners devoted time to repairing clothing, crafting wooden or bone objects, and writing letters or journals that preserved identity, memory, and sometimes hope. Music, scarce but vital, flourished in these moments. A single violin string plucked, fingers tapping rhythmically on a table, or a whispered tune could transform a barracks corner into a space of shared emotion, expression, and temporary liberation. Storytelling and improvised games reinforced community, allowed creative exploration, and provided mental stimulation. These activities, blending art, play, and collaboration, were essential to maintaining psychological resilience, reinforcing agency, and asserting humanity in a setting designed to constrain both. Hygiene remained a persistent concern. Communal washing areas, cold water, and sparse soap heightened vulnerability to disease. Prisoners relied on shared knowledge and resourcefulness to tend wounds, fevers, and digestive ailments. Simple acts of care, covering a shivering comrade, sharing a small ration of water, offering quiet reassurance, were profound, strengthening trust and demonstrating the interdependence of survival, social bonds, and emotional well-being. Maintaining vigilance, empathy, and cooperation was as vital as enduring the physical strain of labor, revealing the nuanced strategies required to survive and preserve humanity in confinement. News from the outside, arriving intermittently through smuggled letters, newspapers, or new prisoners, shaped perception, hope, and morale. Reliable or not, each piece carried significance. Reports of distant battles, parcel deliveries, or rumored escapes circulated rapidly, prompting discussion, speculation, and debate. Prisoners weighed credibility, contemplated implications, and integrated new information into daily strategies, sustaining mental engagement and providing a sense of freedom beyond the fences. This intellectual activity, often shared in hushed conversation, became as essential as food or labor, reinforcing identity and agency in a controlled and restrictive environment. Evenings were a complex interplay of tension and reprieve. Inspections, punishments, and unpredictable guard behavior underscored vulnerability, yet moments of social connection, storytelling, music, and games offered solace and reinforcement of identity. Laughter, whispered jokes, and small victories, a cleverly rationed meal, a repaired garment, a shared anecdote or tune, became acts of resistance, bonding, and resilience. The barracks, dimly lit and filled with murmurs, became a sanctuary, a space for imagination, creativity, and human connection, preserving both morale and a sense of agency in a world designed to suppress them. Night brought reflection, memory, and imagination. Prisoners conjured visions of home, imagined reunions with family, or contemplated escapes that might never occur. Harsh realities, the cold, the straw, distant sounds of boots and barking dogs, coexisted with the warmth of solidarity, creativity, and resilience. Each small act of ingenuity, cooperation, or subtle defiance reinforced identity, sustained morale, and nurtured hope, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of humans to endure, adapt, and assert their spirit even in extreme adversity. Life in the camp was an intricate weave of endurance, creativity, social interaction, and psychological survival. Repetition, scarcity, and uncertainty dominated. Yet within these constraints, prisoners found resourcefulness, empathy, and hope. Simple acts, crafting, sharing, storytelling, music, laughter, took on profound significance, sustaining both body and mind. The rhythm of daily life, interspersed with ingenuity, solidarity, and subtle defiance, wove a living tapestry of resilience and humanity, proving that identity, connection, and hope could persist even under the harshest confinement.